Welcome to the January 10th Planning Commission work session. We have Commissioner Strauss, Belt, Padilla, Smith, Miranda, and staff. We have Carrie Teague, Liz Olson, Addison Lewis, and Chris Ocker.
All right. Did you have anything you wanted to say to start us off, or do you want me to jump into it?
I can just say a few words. So thanks again, everybody, for coming in today to talk about, to continue the ADU discussion. We had some really good feedback the last session, and we're going to cover those today. I'm hoping that at the end of the day today, the last few items that we have to cover, we get them done, so then we could finalize what the draft ordinance would look like, and we could start writing it for us for more formal review. But this is just more of a conversation to hit some of those key points. I know we had some things in there with setbacks is one of it. We have minimum size is another part, and a few other items. And so Addison will help kind of guide us through that, but looking forward to your input again.
All right. So yeah, just a quick recap. Like Commissioner Smith said, at our last meeting, we talked a bit about setbacks and height. Had a lot of discussion about that. I think there was pretty good consensus on a lot of it. It seemed like the one area where there was a lot of discussion was just the appropriate height for an ADU above a garage, specifically that rear yard setback. So we plan to talk a bit more about that today. We talked a little bit about parking last time, and there was some indication that, or some feedback that commissioners felt we could go without having a minimum requirement for a number of parking stalls for ADU. And then we talked a little bit about some of the design requirements that were in the draft ordinance as well. So today we thought we'd continue that discussion on setbacks for two-story ADUs. We also talked about, exceptions for existing structures and non-conforming structures. And after a bit of discussion, staff has some thoughts on that, so we could share that as well. And then it was mentioned that we wanted to discuss minimum size requirements for an ADU again. So I don't have much of a presentation. I thought we could just kind of pick up where we left off. It was asked if we could come up with some better visuals to kind of explain the setback requirements, because I know it was a little bit confusing explaining it verbally. So these are examples of a typical 50 by 200 foot lot, which is typical for Morningside neighborhood actually. So this shows how if you had, let's see here if my mouse will work. A one-story ADU, the requirement would be that it be 5 feet from side and rear lot lines. If it was a two-story ADU, it would need to meet principal structure setback, so that's where it bumps up to 25, and I think that's where you guys were having a lot of discussion, is that's just a big jump going from 5 to 25, and there was a lot of discussion about how we'd maybe find something in between, or do we go with a sliding scale. And then for a two-story ADU that abuts an alley, it needs to be, it can be as close as 5 feet from the alley right of way, and then it would need to meet principal structure setbacks.
Go back to that middle one, the 25 feet. Why was it felt necessary to be 25 feet?
So we just said that a two-story ADU would need to meet principal structure setbacks.
Okay, so, okay.
Trying to be just kind of consistent with the primary dwelling, but you could come up with something different if you feel it's more appropriate.
And the 2 stories, 5 feet off would have an impact on the adjoining property. Whereas with the alley, there's a buffer. Okay, I got it.
Yep, because a typical alley right of way is about 14 feet. So with the 5 foot setback, you're about 19 feet from the next property to the rear. When we talked about like a sliding scale was brought up, we could do that. That's possible. I think for simplicity, we'd probably encourage you guys, if 5 is too close and 25 is too much, I think we would encourage you to find something in the middle of that feels right, whether it's 10, 12, 15, whatever it might be. And so, these graphics, they are to scale, so they kind of show you the relationship of the size of an ADU relative to the size of the lot. So, and here's one with a 75 foot wide lot, when you have a two-story ADU, that principal structure side yard setback gets increased to 10 feet. So that's really the only difference.
Say
But
that
a
again.
one-story could still be at 5 feet.
Oh, 2 stories setback, 10 feet. So that's more, so everything north of 42nd is more like 140 foot setback, like on the left there? And I don't know.
Well,
what
there's a
the ones in-
lot of variation in the depths, I guess.
This is
Yeah.
pretty typical for, say, the
But-
country club district or.
Yeah, and
Post-World War II,
yes, because yours is deep, 200
feet,
feet.
yeah.
Yeah, and mine
Because you
isn't.
match the street grade of St. Louis Park.
Yes.
We don't,
Yes,
so.
and Monterey might be a little bit deeper, but I think anything kind of north.
So here's an example of some lots in Morningside that are 50 by 200 with detached garages that are more than 25 feet setback from the rear. So it can work, but certainly when you have lots that aren't as deep, you're gonna be pushing up closer to the house.
And this is where, if I'm in my backyard enjoying it, I would probably rather have something towards the back than right next to where I'm probably kind of working or hanging out. Right, if I go out in my backyard, I probably stay in the backyard that's closer to the house, because that's where the patios are. You go in and get drinks or whatever it is, and you go out. So then you have the 2-story thing right there, rather than in the back corner. This is what's throwing me on these.
Yeah, I mean, I brought up the, 25 feet back is, I mean, you're going to just have a much smaller backyard as the
Yeah.
homeowner,
Yeah,
and you'd almost think your neighbor behind you would rather have a building than have their backyard, which is now very small.
yeah.
It's going to be, they're going to be playing or whatever in the backyard right next to the fence or whatever, so, I don't know. Seems like you should incentivize having the common area in the center, and, the property owner can divide it up if they want, but.
And for me, the thing is, it'd be nice if it could be a story and a half. Right, just enough to be able to put a little living space up above, not a full 2-story. So that's, because I think they can be charming. And more, right, just like a fence, it's a diminutive house. I'd rather have it on the fence line than right in the middle of the backyard adjacent to me. If one was built next to me, I'd rather have it way in the back.
When you say a story and a half, they would live in the first story, but could you live in that half story?
Yeah, well, that's the one Christopher Strom section that you had from a long time ago, yes. So that is 16 feet 11 at midpoint. You get, and that's an 8.6. It gets a little tight up there, but even at like 19 feet, you get a more pleasant space in the second floor.
It would almost be like a loft, right?
It'd almost be, well, this would be like a loft, but so that one, there's the 5 foot, 14 by 26, that's 24 by 26.
So correct me if I got these heights wrong, but, so for the accessory dwelling unit, you could go to 25 feet to the top, to the very highest point of with a single-family home, the maximum is 30 feet, so the single-family, I think I got that right. So the single-family home is gonna be a little bit bigger. We're not allowing them quite as tall at 25 feet. Just to give you a little comparison.
And we measure to the peak, so like in this figure that Chris sent, this would measure at 24 feet. Because that's how I thought.
Yeah, because and that's what in country club, That's where I did the garage addition, and we did some storage up above and did a pull-down stair, but that little leftover space was just a little too short to be in there comfortably as a full-grown adult. And that's where my clients, right, they followed the letter of the law, and then the two adjacent projects to the north that were done prior were much larger. And
That was the 18-foot height that you ran it?
mine was the 18-foot height, yeah.
Heights came down.
What?
The measurement for how you measured heights came down.
Yes, and I understand that. But for an ADU, I think it'd be more pleasant having, say if 4 houses had ADUs and they all put them in the back corner, everybody would have like a nice yard in front of it. Otherwise, there's gonna be this weird leftover space between them where the old paint buckets and the overturned rowboats are gonna hang out, and and the weeds are gonna start taking over. That's what I worry about, that kind of leftover space behind there. And I think if there's just a little bit more height allowed, and even just like a foot, it makes a world of difference for a little space, a little living space.
I think we're talking here about a 2-story ADU. And first of all, generally speaking, it would be a garage type of space, right? Just because the maximum floor space would be 1,000 square foot. So you could even live in a
bigger, build it. Yeah.
It'd be well, the max size is 1,000 square feet. If it's a story and a half, the first story is livable, and the second half story, or the half story, that would also count towards livable space, right? And so I just don't see how adding the half story would make sense if you're living in the lower section anyway.
But you could build like a 300 square foot
Smaller section below and
footprint and have your living space, and then have a bedroom upstairs that's 150 square feet. And it'd be a pretty nice little structure. So I think we're eliminating a possibility, which they allow in Minneapolis. They allow 640. Well, that was a while ago when I looked at the Minneapolis, the 640 square foot. So it's not, but it feels like we're disincentivizing a charming middle ground. So it's either 1 story or it's this larger 2-story thing, and we're not allowing.
I don't think the 1.5 story would be prohibited. That scenario wouldn't be prohibited in what you're saying.
Because you're doing, it's the 18 foot to the max, you're doing the, at 8,
We're saying
It
25.
could be up to 25, but then it
has to be the 25,
principal
yes.
stuff. Yeah.
Yes, so if it's 5 feet from the property line, it has to be 18 feet, and there's no real way to make that half story.
Yeah.
So it's like we're here or here, but there's this kind of sweet little structure that we're not allowing. And that's what?
At 5 feet, that you would still want to allow at 5 feet, but not all the way up to 25 feet.
Yes. Well, you're doing a max height. But if someone did a 1.5 story where it had, like it's a miniature Cape Cod or a miniature salt box, those won't happen. Or even having a little studio above, a little studio apartment above a garage in the back. isn't gonna happen at that 18 feet.
Quick question, that's so interesting, just so I could understand this too. If I'm 5 feet from the rear yard setback, right, I have a 1-story or 1-level ADU, with my roof height, that can go up to 18 feet?
Yep.
So that'll be like the half story, right?
But you can't, if you're, so say your floor plate is 6 inches above grade and you have an 8-foot ceiling and you have 12 inches of floor structure, you've only got a little under 7 feet than above that, so that you can't live in that. I mean, I think 7 feet is the minimum, but it's a little unpleasant. So it doesn't allow for a normal ceiling height in that half story at 18 feet. It allows for 7 feet going down, but it doesn't allow you to have a little area where there's a decent ceiling height.
What are you saying, that as a neighbor, you're worried about? Like 1.5 stories, or 1 story, that's still too high? Is that what you're worried about?
Well, there's two things, I think. I think we have to think about the neighbors that live in the yards behind and at the sides. And we don't want to have too large of an imposing structure close to their fence line. So that's one. And the other part was, if we could allow an 18-foot structure, but we live on 1 story, but we could build up to 18 feet tall, 5 feet from the rear lot line, up to 25 feet from the rear lot line. So we're not going to build a 2-story yet. We're still in that 18-foot height. I just was thinking that the 18 feet height is a 1.5 story that you could build between 5 and 25 feet from the rear lot line. So I feel like it was accomplishing the goal still. And you could build it anywhere within that range.
Well, at 18 feet, once again, you got a floor structure and you've got the first floor height and you've got whatever structure, you have this kind of loft space. You're kind of, if people want to have a little loft space, you're pushing them into a modern box, flat roof box, and you're not allowing some of these more charming profiles.
So I just wanted to point out, so this is, what's in black is the existing ordinance. We do allow 1.5 stories to be 5 feet from the rear lot line, but what I think I hear you saying is just that that's just really difficult to do under 18 feet. It wouldn't allow for a very large.
Yeah.
What you're getting is storage space, but not living space.
Yes.
Right? I mean,
Yes.
it's just not usable
Yes.
for anything other than.
You can get up there, but it's like, it would be right above my head and I couldn't go like this.
It's an attic storage, yeah.
Yeah, or you had to go between the trusses or whatever it is.
Do we know if in all the neighboring cities, what kind of ADUs have been built subsequent to, ordinances being passed? What are the?
I don't have a lot of details on the exact types. It varies because they have different requirements. Interestingly, when I talked to Crystal, like the majority of theirs were internal. I think those are the cheapest, but we've heard that those can be difficult with kind of bringing the walls up to that 1 hour fire rating. So I was surprised to hear that. But yeah, I think it just kind of varies depending on each city and their requirements. Like St. Louis Park, they said they haven't had any built yet because most of the interest was for doing them above a garage, but they don't allow them. Their height is too restrictive. Richfield only allows detached if it is attached to a detached garage.
Can you go to Christopher Strom's website? He has a bunch of.
Was there something in particular that?
Well, the one on the left looks like a 2-story, and that one is the one that's, I don't know under the projects if they had, if he had a lot of. And that one section starts to show it. And I could do a quick graphic about what the 18-foot means for internal head height, because I don't think it has to be the whole 24 to get.
And this,
I can do a version of that with the 18-foot max and show you what that, or send around to everybody what that means for that half story in a pitched roof. Yeah, it'd be a pitched roof, it'd be a double pitched roof, an A-frame, they come down to the
so
ground,
you
so,
could do
yeah,
something like this,
yeah.
where you add the dormers, or make it more of a flat roof.
Yeah.
But you're
So-
saying
so
this
it's
is
like
less charming, we're incentivizing this, is what you're
We're
saying.
incentivizing
versus-
this, and we're not,
Yeah, and that comes back to just how we measure height,
yeah,
because a lot of other cities measure it to the midpoint of a gable roof,
Yeah.
or the highest point of a flat roof, and we just go to the highest point for both.
yeah.
You're saying this can come back to bite us? By measuring it to the top.
Well, I mean, I don't necessarily know if it would or not, but I think it disallows some things that would be charming, that I would, if it was right across the property line from my house, I would be happy to have it there. I'd rather have that than the flat roof, but
So
it,
is the question, we want to allow 2 stories and 25 feet at the 5-foot setback line? I think that's kind of what we're.
I don't think we want to do 2 stories at the 5-foot setback line, but I think we want to be able to allow.
Would 20 feet height work? Going from 18 to 20?
I could check it, but I think that would allow just a little bit of room, because you got the 5 feet, it would just allow you enough room. Let me check it real quick. I've got a cross-section already started on the one project. I'd be able to throw some numbers on it. And maybe you guys don't want to keep stringing this along.
Well, we want to get it right?
Yeah. It's just kind of on that note, so Crystal, Minneapolis, Richfield, and St. Paul are all the ones that allow you to do the 2 stories at 5 feet or less. In the case of St. Paul, they allow 3 feet. But St. Louis Park does not. Minnetonka does not.
A 2-story ADU, the first story would be like a kitchen, maybe a dining area.
So you could have, your open space, right? The minimum is 120 square foot room, floor space, for a living area in most, I think, in the code. And then like a little kitchenette and a little hallway and a bathroom and a storage on the main floor. And so if you had like a 200 square foot first floor, and maybe it's like it could be half the square footage of the first floor, right? If you had 200 to 300, you could do 100 or 150 on the second floor, right, to incentivize some of those more charming roofs. You don't have as much, like you can't live over the whole area, but you can live under the sweet spot in the peak of the roof. And maybe if we just limit the square footage, then we can get some of those little pitched roof ones, which I think would be charming.
Can I come at this from a different angle? So if we look at the alley situation, right? So the alleys, you say, what, 14 feet wide?
Yep.
So if the alley's 14 feet wide, but you're splitting that, let's pretend the property went all the way to the middle of the alley. So you're getting 7 feet there, and you're getting 5 feet from it, because we allow 2 stories, 5 feet from the property line if there's an alley.
That's what's proposed, yeah.
Right. So you take that 5 feet, you add 7, which is half of the distance across the alley. Now you've got 12 feet. So is there any reason we wouldn't allow a two-story 12 feet? I mean, I think that should be our new minimum anyway, or maximum. Because then 12 feet would be the same thing,
It seems
basically.
fair, at least.
Right.
So you're just kind of cutting that in half, that 25 foot, yeah?
Yeah. That's a start.
And it does have to be a smaller structure than the main structure, so it wouldn't be as big as the main structure, so pushing it back a little farther.
It has to be smaller?
The ADU is maximum 1,000 square feet, and you're keeping it 25 feet, so it doesn't have to be, but
Typically, yeah.
typically it's gonna be a little bit smaller.
And at 12 feet, so that's an additional 7 for an additional 7 feet of height. So it's like 1-to-1.
1-to-1. Yeah, and so in a property like mine, which is 140 feet deep versus the 200, it wouldn't feel like it's right in the middle of your backyard. Even pushing it back that.
I'm okay with that. 12 feet.
So then it would be 18 feet closer to the property line and 25 feet at 12.
12 feet.
Yeah, I mean, that's only, because you have to put at least 3 feet away from the property line. I always have to look these up every time. It's been 30 seconds and I forgot.
So if I understand correctly, 12 feet from the property line, 25 feet high. 5 foot from the property line, 18 feet high. Right?
Yeah. 5 foot from, yeah,
Yeah, cutting this to 12.
yeah. Yeah, in that scenario, it wouldn't feel like it's crowding the main house so much. Like if you move that whole blue dot up half, it wouldn't feel like it's crowding. You have 2 separate yards in your lot.
And I think part of your rationale too is just that 25 feet is like a dead space too, right? And it's kind of crowding in the yard. And if you could push it back as far as you can, ideally,
Yeah.
right?
Because people tend to forget. I mean, I've got a blue tarp behind my garage that I forget every single year, and I'm sure some of my neighbors are like, what?
So they put a wall of bushes
Out
behind
of
it.
sight, well, out of sight, out of mind, it just happens.
That's very Minnesota, having a canoe or kayak.
How do you guys feel about that, everybody?
I like that 12 foot. I do recall it, that 25 does seem to sort of create
Big dead space.
kind of a, unusable space where it'd be best to, I think, between the primary and that's the most usable part of the yard, so, yeah.
And again, this is if you want to build 2 stories.
Right.
Right?
So we're gonna keep it simple, 1 story at 2 stories, 1 story 18, and then 2 stories at 12.
25.
Oh, yes,
12.
18,
18 at 5 feet.
yes. 25 at 12 feet.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
So we have precedent for both of those. So in the one case, we allow other outbuildings that are that tall
Yeah,
to be that close.
yeah,
And in the other case, it's virtually the same thing as having an alley going between
Yes.
the houses.
Yeah, I
So-
think that's a good.
So
I
we
think
have,
that-
and, it's not just we invented this out of thin air.
Yeah. No,
We have
that's good.
No, that's,
yeah.
That's really.
so what do you guys think? What do you guys think?
Inventing things out of-
Oh, no, I always look at it in terms of enforcement and looking at plans, and we'll get a lot of plans in for accessory structures that are not dwelling units, that they want to have an extra,
Yeah.
like a studio or an office or whatever.
Yeah.
That would be lumped into the accessory structure piece, and they couldn't get the 24-foot height, but they'll want it. And they'll, it'll be a situation where we'll probably get a lot of ADUs. It will not be ADUs necessarily, they won't be used for that, but because people want more space and they're able to accomplish that with that height. I don't know,
So they'd
maybe if
say
it's a
they
problem
want
or
the
not.
ADU, but they're gonna put an office up there.
An office or
Pool
studio
house.
or a pool house or, you know, a recreation room. I mean, that was part of the issue with the country club district. You see a lot of the taller detached garages that are right in the corner and they're literally 2 stories almost, a lot of them. There was a lot of pushback on those because people had run out of room. They couldn't cover their lots with any more buildings, so they popped the top of the detached garages. But a lot of the neighbors next to them didn't really care for that because it's literally, you know, 3 feet or 5 feet away from the lot line and you have this large structure. And so how we measure height changed and that brought down the heights. And so,
But we're just talking country club for that.
well, no, in a lot of neighborhoods, but it's very visible in country clubs.
Yeah,
But the ordinance applies everywhere. So we could see the same, you know, people maxed out on their lot coverage, how can they get more space?
yeah,
You know, they pop the top of the garage.
yeah.
And so we did get a lot of pushback, and that's why some of the changes were made to the ordinance. So what I'm seeing is that we will get permit applications for a pool cabana or whatever, and they're gonna wanna get up to that 24 feet, whatever the maximum would be. But it's not a dwelling unit, so I'd have to say, no, it's 18 feet. Maybe it's not a problem, maybe that's what we wanna see, then maybe they'd have to do a dwelling unit. Somehow turn this, it's not gonna be occupied as a dwelling unit necessarily, but
Yeah, we have because people can build these ADUs
yeah.
and decide they're not gonna rent them out.
Yep, you lose control after the permitting
Which-
process.
yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think,
I'm just saying, we're going to see a lot more accessory structures that are taller, regardless of what they're used for. And previously, years ago, there was pushback with that.
but those were all like right on the property line.
Generally speaking, they were closer to the property.
Yeah, yeah.
But
So the-
if you can do a 2-story at 14 feet and 5 maybe, or 2-story on an alley, that you're gonna be 5 feet away, you know, maybe it's not gonna be an issue, I don't know, but.
But at least at 12 feet, I mean, you can put a row of decent-sized bushes back there.
Yep. It's just always difficult to enforce something when you have 2 different height requirements for something that's accessory to the principal structure. And
But
what-
also, because accessory dwelling units, I mean, have to have certain things in them.
Correct.
And once again, I mean, we can't control if someone rents it out or not, but we're kind of not worrying about that.
No, and all I'm saying is, and that's fine, we'll just see most of the accessory,
Yes.
whatever it is, they're all
Yes.
gonna be 24 feet tall. The permits, unless they're trying to get closer, you know, 5 and 5 or 5 and, if it's gonna be 5 and 14, they will be 24 feet tall.
So they have to be, we're gonna, because we're saying if they're 24 feet tall, 20, or 25 feet tall,
Okay.
they have,
Sorry, 25.
they have to be, it's okay, I'm trying to keep it straight in my own head. They have to be 25, it has to be set back 25 feet from the property line.
12.
12 feet.
12 feet. Oh, we just changed it to 12 feet. So, so someone will want an accessory building.
Everything will be
It's an
25
incentive
feet.
to put an
Yeah.
accessory dwelling unit in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what we
So,
want.
yeah.
So let me explore this a little bit more. I think, I love how you're giving us
Yeah.
how the applicants would actually apply for it. I think this is good. So if we allow this, we're saying that some folks would now apply for an ADU, and they might use the bottom level for storage, or top level for storage, and the other side for living. But you would think that instead of just building it as one story, you see a lot of two stories.
Come through.
Tell me why you think that, actually.
Well, previous to the change in how height is measured for accessory structures, there's a lot of situations where people have maxed out on their building coverage, so they can't add to the footprint, so then they'll plot the top and use that space for whatever they'd like to use it for. If it's an accessory structure, it's not a dwelling unit, so they would not be able to use the 25 feet in height. So what I'm saying is this change in ordinance will kind of make that 18 feet for accessory dwelling units, that it's all of those accessory structures will be 25 feet and they'll be classified as a dwelling unit. We just won't see, unless somebody really wants one, but there's always this pressure to, everybody wants them higher, and maybe that's not a problem.
Is there there's a property coverage limit on accessory, not accessory dwelling, but accessory buildings, but not a square footage? There's no like total square
Just a
footage?
combined of 1,000 square feet, so if you have a shed and a cabana and a.
Okay, well, so it has.
On this, it's all lumped together, it's the same.
Okay.
For
So-
this.
Okay.
So if people have maxed out their property and they want to build an accessory dwelling unit, they can only have a 250 square foot footprint. Or do we still have that?
Still in there.
Okay.
So Chris, what was the pushback that you were getting? What were the issues?
The neighbors around taller garages, detached garages, they felt they were too tall. And they were usually, at the minimum setback, so.
And they would build, like, in the case of the one that was right next to my client who did do the 18-foot, just a storage over a garage, the one next to it is probably at 27 feet, and it was a good-sized two-car garage. So it was probably 600, and they have like 1.5 stories. It was just a massive, it feels like it's twice the building mine.
I'm just saying that, it's just how things are gonna probably go, but that's okay. Maybe we want all these accessory structures to be accessory dwelling units, but they don't necessarily, and you're right, we can't control,
Yeah.
what they use the space for, but, and you have a deeper setback for the taller structures, so it probably will work.
And I think just because, I think it would make me nervous, except for the fact that we still have our lot coverage requirements. If someone's maxed out, they can't build 1,000 square foot accessory dwelling unit. They can only build 250 square foot. So it's gonna be more diminutive. It's gonna be like because right now you can build a shed of 225 square feet without a permit.
It still counts as coverage, though.
It still counts as coverage.
Know about it if you don't need a permit. But yeah.
Yeah. So, I think at 250 square feet, it's gonna feel pretty diminutive. It's gonna be half the size of a standard, not a large garage, but a standard.
Outside of Country Club and Morningside, well, actually just generally east of 100, are there resident houses that have, or that anyone's building attached garages anymore? Are there?
There's some people who still like to take tubs rather than showers, right? It is, people are people.
Right.
I like my detached garage because I think as soon as the garage is part of the house, it just inflates the size of the house unnecessarily.
I agree,
Yeah.
but it seems like, every tear down in our neighborhood has an attached garage. I can't think of any, of anyone that doesn't have an attached garage?
I know some people who remodel and keep their detached garage, but I know, like right in my area, because of the flooding, you can't really build it in the backyard anymore, so you have to build it. So, I think there's a lot of different reasons.
All right.
Probably covered all of this.
No, it's good to, well, because it doesn't sink in until the third or fourth conversation.
You look at it from a very different perspective. You have so much more experience.
Yeah.
dealing with residents, you know, you have the full gamut that we
Well,
don't
I
have.
guess it's not a problem, because if they're gonna, no matter what they use it for,
Yeah,
it's still gonna be a dwelling unit, and
Yeah.
that's what we're looking for, and,
yeah.
you know, the height is.
And bringing them forward, so even if someone doesn't, they sell the house, somebody else can then use it, right? Because the goal is, I just read the Pew Research Center, our population is supposed to peak in 100 years, and after that, drop again. So we're only supposed to add another 2 billion people to the planet, and then it's supposed to go back down. So in 100 years, it's gonna be a different situation. And then I think all our property values are gonna plummet unless you're close to the center and can walk to someplace, because there'll be no.
So that's the long view.
So I think with this one, I love the perspective of how would residents or folks game the system, right? How would they try to take advantage of this new ordinance?
They do, they're just human.
You always have to think about that. I think this one would be okay, just because if you were gonna park on top of your garage anyway, right? Instead, you would do this. Now, we didn't talk about non-conforming structures. These are all conforming structures, all 5 feet, but there are some sheds that are 1 foot from the property line. And I think these non-conforming structures, we don't want to incentivize building more on a non-conforming structure.
We're not talking about you or anything, but we're talking about you.
Yes, yes, so we do not want you to build an ADU on a non-conforming structure. Even like a 1-story on a non-conforming structure. I think that's how we think about it too. Let's just talk about that for a little while and see if that makes sense.
Well, that would be a variance, or?
Well, yeah, so
Variance.
I think, yeah, there was some discussion last time about wanting to accommodate them by right above detached garages, and so then there's 2 questions, like if we're talking about a detached garage that is non-conforming and doesn't meet the setback, we talked about how we have a section in the code that allows expansions to non-conforming structures, but it does specifically say that that addition has to be on the same level as the non-conformity, so this would be a change from that. Like, so like if you have a 1-story house, like a Rambler that doesn't meet the side yard setback, we allow you to do an addition off the back, but not do a 2nd story above it. And I mean, with non-conformities, generally we want them to go away because we're saying this is something that's not appropriate. So it probably doesn't make sense to allow somebody by right to make that worse. But if we feel it is okay, then we should just change the setback to make it legal.
Could someone apply for a how does the variance, how would the variance aspect play? Like, and you guys, like, make it so can't build one, I don't get, like, seriously, I'm not buying it. I actually thought about this, and like, if I ever did it, it would be because I moved my mom in or something like that. But like, she totally wouldn't respect my wife and I's boundaries, and so I don't think I'm gonna do anything. Like she'd be out wandering all over the place, it would just be a disaster. So don't worry about hurting my feelings, but you can, like, you know, Lou, in Morningside, there's some shared driveways. That's why actually mine doesn't conform, because the driveway is shared. And so 2 garages actually are just right next to each other on the line. And, you know, I personally wouldn't care if they added something to theirs. They probably wouldn't care if I had something to mine. But it's a weird situation that exists someplace in Edina. I don't really have a point of view about whether we want to permit it or not. But would someone like me, you know, who would want to maybe just add one level on top of the garage, would someone like me need to get a variance?
So yeah, that's what we're saying, is if you have a garage that's like on the property line,
Yeah.
so it's a non-conforming garage.
It's on the line, yeah.
Because this is saying you'd have to meet the principal structure setbacks, or 12 feet from the rear yard. So yeah, you would need to get a variance. The discussion at the last meeting, it seemed like, was going down the road of how do we allow people to do those additions by right so that they don't need to get a variance? And after looking at that a bit closer, we wouldn't recommend that.
Yeah. I don't really see a problem with requiring people to meet the variance criteria. I mean, you can imagine maybe a situation where there's just something unique about the property where it makes sense to have an ADU. It's in the spirit of whatever but it's just a weird property like mine. And And you'd have to make a showing that it was justified. So that the city doesn't get, I mean, why should you be able to build it by right when there's that much nonconformity? But if there's a path to build it, if it maybe makes sense, I wouldn't have a problem with trying to, I don't think other residents would either, trying to get approval to vary from what's required, but I don't know what everybody else thinks.
I'm okay with it coming in for variance.
And that's like for a one-story and even just a conversion of a shed to a living space.
Yeah.
So, that would also need a variance.
Yeah. I mean, I would need a variance if I want to change anything about it, probably. Just because it's not in conformance. Even if I wanted to rebuild it, probably need to get a variance or something like that. But, so I don't see this as different than any other type of modification you might want to make. Where there's a non-conformity, but.
I think that's helpful. We'll switch to, I think, minimum size here, but this kind of bugs me a little bit in the back of my mind, but a lot of detached structures today, it's not livable. Let's just say just like a garage. It's a floating slab. And I think for it to be living space, correct me if I'm wrong here, it needs to have frost footings. So if that's the case, they'll have to dig up the whole thing and rebuild in that spot, okay? And so it's not gonna be a simple, I'm just gonna throw the junk out and put someone in there. You have to dig out the whole thing and basically rebuild.
And you need plumbing too.
And you need plumbing, you need sewer, you need all those things, okay?
Jimmy said something, sorry, go ahead.
Well, maybe, what is staff's opinion for these new units, that it would be most often all new construction, or, because then otherwise and then like what you said is that if they're trying to rehab an existing structure, I mean, that's where we'd probably get into this non-conforming. How often, so require, I mean, they're almost always gonna have to redo, especially if they're getting into foundation issues and all that kind of stuff. That once it's all removed and it's new construction, then you can basically say, these are the rules.
Yeah, I think.
Right, you just say,
You guys
build.
are trying to accommodate was, how can we let them keep the existing structure and just add on top of it?
Yeah,
But from talking to our building department, it doesn't sound like that's really gonna be possible, so like that probably won't be very common, that won't be something we run into a lot.
so not wanting to sort of burden staff with time bombs down the road, I mean, just issues. The expectation is that these may be so rare that, if it's 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 a year, that's not, I wouldn't think that's a terrible burden.
Yeah, I mean, we will probably get variance requests, but I just don't see us getting a lot of variance requests because someone wants to just add a second story onto an existing garage, because I just don't think that's a scenario where it's gonna work very frequently.
Again, last point again on before the size, but I think parking, right? You can talk about parking on every home needs to have at least one covered parking spot.
Yeah, we discussed that a little bit at the end of the last meeting, and it sounded like there was consensus on just not having a requirement for
Additional parking.
additional parking.
Right.
Yeah,
Because we still have our off-street winter parking requirements.
correct, right, yeah, so people, can't park on the
Yeah.
street for more than 6 hours year round.
Okay. Yep. Just wanted to
Okay.
state it for record, I guess.
Right, which is nice, because if you decide you want to rent to some young person, you say, you've got room for a bike here, and they can get around town.
That lives along the E line, they go to the U,
Yeah,
even the
so I think it
professor.
allows for some of those things. You want, really, we want these things close to transit corridors or close to areas where people don't have to rely on cars, ultimately. There'll probably be more money to put them in some other areas, but, yeah. I'm okay without.
Yeah, I think that's good. Okay. All right. I guess the last point might be minimum size?
Yeah, you wanna revisit that?
I do, I guess I am worried that we'll get some really kind of minimal dwelling units if we don't have a minimum size. You know, I was kind of sketching out, okay, there's, well, in my head mentally, you know, bathroom, a little kitchenette, living space, bedroom. You know, if someone doesn't have a separate bedroom or whatever it is, or decides to have it all loft, you know, that we might get these 150 square foot, which California allows, 150 square foot minimum. We might get these really minimal footprints and people putting 2 people in there. So I'm kind of thinking that if someone really wants to put in a 150 square foot dwelling for 2 people, they have to come to us and ask for it. I'd rather have them ask for a variance for it than just do it. All right, is that making sense, or? You know, because all of the other, you know, Minneapolis is 250, Wayzata is 300, everybody has a little over 200
I
square
think,
feet.
yeah, I can try to find it, where I looked at all the other cities and it was like half of them had a minimum, but half didn't. So not every city had a minimum ADU size,
Okay.
but a lot of them do, so. I can try to find
What
that.
do you think the minimum should be?
Well, I would say 200, I would keep it simple once again, that if we're allowing people who have maxed out their lot size to put a 250 square foot ADU, that is also a minimum. I would just keep it simple, the number simple. And I think if you said that there was a separate sleeping area from a living area, code asks for the living area to be 120 square feet. And if you have like kitchen counter beyond that, living space of 120 square feet, you're like at 146 square feet. And if you have like 40 square feet for bed, it's 186 square feet. And if you have, you know, a minimal bedroom, the smallest I could come up with in my head was like 225 square feet when I was running the numbers for the different spaces. So that's why. I
I
just
think
think,
in big cities everywhere, there's studio apartments that are basically one room and a
Yeah.
bathroom. So, I mean, I don't know that you need to have all these separations. I think if you're thinking in terms of, you know, what small living spaces look like, it's often
but
just one room.
because I think some of those studios, like there's shared amenities in the building. If there's a apartment complex that has a lot of really minuscule spaces where someone is just in a room with a kitchenette, that there's laundry facilities somewhere on the property, or, you know, meeting spaces somewhere, or a place to hang out somewhere else on the property. But if this is the person's only dwelling space, I guess I worry about having, all sorts of 100 square foot spaces where 2 people have to live 24 hours a day.
I just can't imagine that that's gonna be an issue that's gonna come up very often. I mean, I think people are gonna go to a lot of trouble to build an ADU that's only 150 square feet. You know, it's gonna be a very expensive proposition for a pretty small area unless you're limited by kind of your overall space constraints and things like that. I'm from New York City, you know, studio apartments that are very small. You know, a lot of people live in them for a very long time, you know, you know, so I don't see the necessity for a minimum.
And is it like a concern about quality and like taking advantage of something, is how you're looking at it?
Yeah.
So you're trying to establish a minimum, like a minimum standard, a minimum quality for the city versus putting that burden on the homeowner to decide that for themselves.
I did find the other city examples The cities that don't have a minimum are Crystal, Hopkins, Minnetonka, and St. Paul. And Bloomington, Golden Valley, Minneapolis, Richfield, St. Louis Park do have.
We're allowing a maximum of 2 ADUs per property?
No. What ADUs?
Just one,
One ADU.
just one ADU.
So. And you're talking about inside, outside, right? You're talking about any kind of ADU? in
I'm
terms of the
talking
size.
about detached,
Oh,
separate,
You're only talking about detached, okay.
separate.
I see.
Is it worth, if you're gonna spend that much money to build a building, is it worth it to build such a tiny building?
That's my point.
Yeah.
And well, you know, someone picks up a tiny home,
We don't allow storage containers, do we?
that's what,
And the tiny homes are what, about 250? Aren't they usually?
no, I think tiny homes can be smaller,
I guess they're getting more into manufactured housing, that's true.
yeah.
Well, I think we talked last time too that, I guess, yeah, there's nothing in the zoning ordinance that would stop someone from doing that as the primary dwelling either. Now that we don't have the basement requirement.
Yeah, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think it's just maybe it's an irrational fear, but it's just and I think if someone comes to us and say, listen, we're gonna build this really high quality, and this is the reason why we're doing it, and there's a compelling reason, if they ask for a variance, I'd say yes. But I think what I fear is, you know, the landlords that aren't gonna be so.
Isn't like the average child's bedroom 150 square feet in a diner?
And I'm not saying, I'm telling you guys my fear, and you guys can totally talk me out of it or not. I'm just,
I mean, if it got taken over by corporate interests, you know, and we allowed a lot of corporate ownership of homes or whatever, I can definitely see that being, and we allowed more than one ADU, I could definitely see that being a problem.
well, because so every ADU needs a permit, no matter what. So they have to go through the building department.
Yes.
And what would be required? If someone came to you and said, I'm building an ADU, it needs a bathroom, and the bathroom has to meet certain clearance, right?
Yeah, there are some minimum standards set by the building code, like you mentioned, for bedrooms and bathrooms and spacing between.
So do we say in there that there has to be a separate bedroom space from the living space, or can the bedroom space be in the?
We just say it has to meet the current Minnesota residential code. So whatever is required for a dwelling unit, it has to comply with that. We're not trying to differentiate from other types of dwelling units here with respect to that.
So that might be okay then. Like if they have to meet those requirements, we know it's going to be a safe, decent size, state allowed space, so then you probably don't need a minimum size.
Well, I think, so from my recollection, then you need to have a space that's 120 square feet, clear, floor space. And then the kitchen counter, if you have a refrigerator, stove, sink, you need about another 12 square feet. So 132 square feet and another like 40 square, so it'd be 172 square feet. And maybe a little hall, so it gets close to 200 square feet.
And what's wrong with it?
Hmm?
Someone built a 172 square foot unit. I was reading an article, these people in Tokyo live in 95 square foot micro apartments and they love them. They're thrilled. They couldn't be happier with it. These young kids live in these tiny, I'm not saying that's culturally what people
They
want
also
to do in this
live,
country,
they
but-
also live in cities where you can walk out the door and there's a lot
That's a good point, yeah.
Yeah, I know.
around you. We're talking about backyards.
Just, I'm trying to make it real in my head, like if someone builds 120, 72, these numbers, it's like, I don't know what it is. I can't imagine it, but something 200 square feet.
Well, and
What
I'm
bad
not,
thing's
I mean,
gonna happen to the person who's in that thing?
yeah, And that's what I've never, I mean, I always push back when everybody tries to do the minimal thing, so I don't know exactly what the minimal standards are. And
So-
I'm the only one bringing them up.
Well, if we have, I mean, I think back to, I grew up on Long Island, so, their illegal accessory units are everywhere. It's like, people just don't even care. So if we have a minimum of 250, does that incentivize people to build the smaller ones illegally?
Well,
How could they get approval to do that?
No,
I don't think that-
I mean, in other words, they
In their
carve out a
basement.
space in their house to rent
Yeah.
out or whatever.
Okay.
That was a mother-in-law apartment or whatever.
Because they can't meet the minimum?
Yeah, if they don't wanna meet the minimum, whatever. And maybe that's just as ludicrous as people building a whole bunch of 150 square foot ones, I don't know, but, I just don't think they'll happen in Edina where, the properties are so large and your garage is bigger than that, and again, unless corporate interests get involved where they'll do anything to make a buck, I think the average Edinan would be a slumlord somewhere else, but not in their own yard.
Yeah, not one that's right in their face. Yeah, maybe it's irrational on my part.
If we have to
What-
reverse
how-
course.
But what do you think the city council, so just quick, what do you think the city council will say if we propose a no minimum?
I'm not sure what they would say. They might look at what the other cities are doing, and say, well, if it's good for these guys, maybe it's good for us too. And for Blue's point, in Edina, you're rarely probably gonna see something like that. I don't think they're gonna have an issue with it.
Plus, the practical answer is that by the time you meet all the building codes, you're gonna be pretty darn close to what most of the other cities that do have minimums are, right? You're gonna come pretty close to 200 just to meet the building code.
Yeah, and that's why they just go ahead and say it, rather than having to kind of fight the person at the counter that comes and says, listen, I'm building this 100 square foot. And then the official has to say, no, it has to be, right?
Right, but on the odd
So I
chance
think,
that it's 190 instead, doesn't seem to be like it's a big deal. I think you got your bases covered in other areas.
and that's where I think we just make it easy.
Right.
So there's not any friction
Right.
in the building department.
That kind of, yeah.
Is it, I suppose, if it meets building code, then
Yeah, I mean, well, I would say that we want to be as permissive as possible.
Okay.
And the city, if the city council wants a minimum, they could just say, we like everything you did, but we want a minimum, and we're not going to accept it till you do, and we do it, so it's no big deal. But if we can get it through without them approving, or if we can get them to approve it without that, then let's see, I mean, I just don't think many ADUs are going to be built anyway. And if there's a whole bunch that are really tiny and people start to complain, then yeah, we can revisit the issue, or you guys can, I'll be gone by then. But, I just think it's better to be more permissive at this point, unless there's something really horrible.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think probability of it being really, like a whole bunch of them being built before we have a chance to work on it or something, I think feels pretty slim to me.
Okay.
I mean, how many ADUs do we think are gonna be built the first year, the first 5 years?
It depends on how the ordinance is written.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Greatly. I mean, if it's permissive enough, I think we could see. So.
Okay.
But the concern is generally at the other end of the spectrum, right? The concern is that it's gonna be too big or hitting up against, height requirements or that, it's gonna be rented to too many people or too much turnover or, the concerns I think that the city council will raise as well as other citizens are that it's gonna be the other end of the spectrum toward more size, more traffic, more people, more use.
But then they don't get built. Every other city, Minneapolis has had none, they've upzoned everything and very little of it built, up to fourplexes or whatever. Because of the regulations around it make it so difficult, and it's not.
Because of the litigation around it.
Now also, yeah, because of the judge.
Okay. Well, I think we've talked about it enough, and I think the consensus is no minimum. It's just a building, right? I'm the only one who's. And it might.
Trays where you put people into the.
Drawers, drawers, big, a big set of drawers. Ever see that Seinfeld where they sleep in the drawers?
Okay.
You want density? You got density.
Oh dear. Okay.
So I guess with the rest of the time, kind of open. We could discuss kind of any aspect of the ordinance that anybody has questions or wants to
So
talk more about.
maybe we could just like, I know this was like over a couple of days, right? A couple of sessions. We could just run down maybe the key things that we all agreed to, just to check the boxes, right? And then say, yep, and then we'll draft it up and look at it next. So I can't recall the order, but maybe Addison, you just kind of help us.
Maybe, do we want to just kind of run through it?
Yeah, I think so.
Because, yeah, it's not very long. And I'll add too that once there's kind of a draft that you guys feel like, you know, relatively comfortable with and we're ready to schedule for a public hearing, then we'll have it vetted by our city attorney. So that hasn't been done yet, so I just want to add that. So we have our definition we discussed a little bit early on, and that was tweaked a little bit.
I think the thing of dwelling versus residence. So we were debating what's a dwelling versus what's a residence or something like that. Do you recall?
I think there was some confusion over. Hang on one sec. I can't remember what
We could come back to it.
we were confused on there. That was a while ago.
Yeah. Alright, let's come back to that then. Parking, cover that. You don't need parking when you build one of these. Just make sure it doesn't park on the street. The number 1, not more than 1. ADUs. Right? I think we covered 2, just the entry, you know, you're gonna enter from, I wanna say the sides or the back, not the front. Max size, 1,000 square feet. Minimum size, none. And then we spending most of the time, I think, talking through height and setback, and I think we made some good progress today. I love Lou's analogy of, well, let's just apply the same rule that we applied to the alleyway, right? And so that's going to be, you could build up to 25 feet, 12 feet from the rear lot, red yard lot line, and you could build up to 18 feet if you're 5 feet from the rear yard lot line. Non-conforming structures would require variance for any kind of build. I think we did not want to regulate design. I think we left that out. So I think that's a fair call, right? And I think we did allow, you could build the basement, you convert the entire basement to an ADU, which might tip over 1,000 square feet, but we allowed the basement to be built as an ADU, just so that you don't have to build a bunch of walls and stuff in the basement. I think that's all that I can think of what we covered. I don't know if there's anything else, Addison, that jumps out at you.
I guess I don't know that we've specifically discussed the exemption to building coverage for the first 250 square feet. Do you guys want to talk about that?
Let's just touch on this a little bit. So if I understand this one correctly, you could build up to 250 square feet and not have an impact on floor area coverage?
It would not count towards, yeah, the question is, do you want to exempt some amount of an ADU square footage from building coverage or impervious?
Gotcha.
Since a lot of properties are likely to be at that. We saw in looking at other cities, some cities that, or at least, well, I should say one that I know of, included that. Because they were finding that a lot of the single-family properties were already up to that limit. And they realized they weren't gonna get any if they didn't allow an exemption to lot coverage or building coverage.
And how many, you think that a lot of properties in Edina are already at the limit?
Yeah, we have some analysis on that. There was an intern in engineering that looked just at the Morningside neighborhood and looked at like what percentage of properties that are already up to the max.
Is it typically homes that have been built, you know, new?
New builds.
They just build it up to the limit?
Out and lots more.
Mhm.
Yep. Oh, yeah, we know. Remember the guy that wanted to do the party on the patio? Remember that?
Yes.
Sorry.
So, you know, when you ask the question of, well, how many of these are we gonna get? Stuff like this, it kind of hinges on, is this included or is it not? How many square feet do you allow? Because like 250 square feet is not a lot. I think it was, a city in Vermont that had that and they allowed the first 650 square feet to count. To get like a reasonably sized dwelling unit. 250 is really not a lot.
And what do we let people count now, when they want to put a deck out or something like that? Is it 150 or some amount we don't count towards?
150 square feet, the first 150 is not included, but anything in addition to that is included in the building coverage.
Okay. Got it.
I guess my question related to the 250 square feet is everybody maxes out on the square footage for a new build. And they'd be eyeing that extra 250 to add on to their house for extra square footage.
So they would use that as,
All the components of the separate, so you could have,
so
you could have
suspicious.
a larger family room that has a kitchenette, you could have a fold-out couch, and there's a bathroom. It's already heated because you have, heat throughout the house. It's adding space. It could have a door outside, so it would have a separate entrance and exit.
Right, it would have to be a separate dwelling unit.
But I guess that's what gets tricky is when you're looking at that extra 250, if somebody wants to add it as a separate dwelling unit, if it's part of the house, it can be incorporated into the house.
At least it wouldn't be, well, they could do it on the first level and then they pop the top.
I mean, we have a lot of people that have, like a little space above the garage, maybe an attached garage, and you have a separate staircase from the kitchen up above the garage. It's still part of the principal structure. You can go from the kitchen up there, so it's still considered part of the dwelling unit, principal dwelling unit. You could put a door, partition it off, maybe have a locking door, and then, still have the same stuff, so it's a separate dwelling unit, but it's added space, but you don't necessarily use it as that. I mean, I know a lot of people will be looking at that to increase the square footage of their house.
So what if we said the first 250 square feet of accessory dwelling unit built before the adoption of this ordinance? So people couldn't game it in the future.
Maybe just detached.
Yeah, it would be the ground floor of a detached, because you wouldn't count it if it were a garage with a pop top, because you don't count both floors for coverage. It would just be the garage that would be counted. I guess I'm just looking at that 250 for the principal dwelling unit. Somebody's gonna look at that and want to use it as coverage for their house, for whatever reason they would like to use it.
So we want to incentivize people who have an existing situation, but we don't want to incentivize people to game the system.
Tear down, rebuild, design that, get an extra 250, because they'll go right to that. That's why we reduced the number of building coverage exclusions, because it was so complicated.
Could take it out completely and then see how it goes.
Right, I mean, yeah, cause like Chris was saying, we can't control how people are gonna use it. And I think it would be hard to say, yeah, certain properties are allowed X amount of building coverage, but if you're doing a tear down build, then you get less. I don't know, that would be tricky to do. So I think it's either in there or not at all. That's, I guess, my opinion.
Can't we keep it in there for detached?
So you would just say the first 250 square feet of a detached ADU. I suppose that could mitigate some of that.
If it's a new home and they're maxed out on impervious surface, this would still count towards impervious surface.
Right, so that's the other question is, I guess, do you wanna have the same exemption from impervious surface?
Oh, I don't think you could, well, I don't think you could, because the impervious surfaces, it also involves, grading, drainage, or, how can you do that, so.
Well, this wouldn't count towards the 50% limit, they'd still have to meet all their stormwater requirements.
Yeah, it'd be pretty hard to carve that out as opposed to all the other things. Yeah, they count retaining walls, window walls, steps, everything.
Yeah.
Difficult to say that a tire building is okay, but the rest of it is not. I don't know.
Maybe if that doesn't go in there, they just need a variance if they wanna.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, what's wrong with that? I
If
mean,
they're at their coverage, they'd have to get a variance to add a
Yeah.
separate dwelling unit, and so then you'd have to take up the lot coverage issue as a variance.
what's wrong with that? I mean, and then you just look at whether it's justified. I don't like giving like these big loopholes to coverage.
That one's gonna be hard.
This would be a big one.
really
That's what I'm
hard.
saying. I don't like it. It's like, then, and if someone decided to do a new build and build literally up to the inch that they were permitted, do it. I mean, I know that, but then like, do they get to have another house too? Maybe not, like, you know, maybe you should have thought about that, or think about that in the future when you're gonna tear, like, okay, we're gonna do a tear down, and we want an ADU, so we're gonna make our houses like a little smaller or something like that. So I'm more comfortable making people ask for a variance and justify the departure than creating this type of loop, for the reasons you said.
Yeah, I would agree.
Well, I guess my only concern again is that we want them built kind of along the E line, and that's where properties are kind of smallest, where people are kind of bumping up against these limits. I don't mind giving up even impervious surface, even though I'm generally against it for single-family homes, but if you're gonna add density, if you're gonna add more people living there,
Yeah.
then it's, I mean, if you build an apartment building, you have 100% impervious surface, right?
Yeah.
So, but, you know, again, people can build them as a pool house instead of as a whatever, so we run into that, so, yeah, it's a sticky situation.
Yeah,
I'm okay with.
ideally, yeah, on a transit line or something in a dense area, it's like whatever, but who's really gonna do this? Is it gonna be those people, or is it gonna be?
Well, the thing is, if it requires a variance, then their neighbors are gonna push to not allow them to have it,
Yes.
is the problem.
And article after article is like, why aren't they taking off? It's because there's too many
What's the answer?
limits. And,
You guys know, is this type of work with?
I mean, there are lots of regulations that say take effect, you know, or only applies after the adoption of this ordinance, right? Or before the adoption of this ordinance. Sure, I've seen that before. Because we want to allow older buildings on smaller lots,
Yeah,
this little exception.
yeah,
Right.
I get
But
it.
we don't want to incentivize, as Chris says, we don't want to incentivize new owners
Yeah.
with a lot of money to just overbuild on their
Yeah.
lots.
Yeah, so how do you, I mean, however you accomplish that, like, I'm probably in favor of that.
Yeah, the trick is we have one zoning district, so we have to treat everyone the same. That's the trouble.
And it's not about enforcing it from a date, it's about whether, you're saying whether someone has an existing house versus a new house,
Whether the house was
right?
approved or built before.
Oh, okay.
Well, an existing, if the ordinance changes, which turns it into or it's not conforming right now, it can remain existing non-conforming. So it's not going to affect a situation where it's existing. Like say, for example, you have, it's over 25% and you have a lower level that's, you know, large rambler, you know, it's basically another unit. That's not gonna, I don't think that language is gonna affect an existing situation. Is that what you mean? Like if it's already existing as a,
Well,
or the
you know,
square
putting
footage
it,
of a building's already over and they wanna convert a portion of it, that's not gonna.
yeah, I'm just saying literally put, you know, that exception only applies for houses that were approved or built before the adoption of this ordinance. So they can't game the system in the future, but we're allowing current houses that weren't designed to game the system.
I think we'd still have a lot of people gaming the system.
Yeah.
Yeah. They might start out to have a wall there on the inside that separates that 250 square foot addition, but that becomes a door pretty easily on the inside.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
You guys are on the front lines, you know what,
Yeah.
you know what actually happens out there instead of what theoretically happens, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, that's a nice to have. I mean, if we can't get it, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I think if we take it out, it just forces folks to build up or just convert the space that they already have. And to, you know, the earlier point, with if they really have a need, they can come and we can take a look. Fine? Good, taking it out? Okay, let's try with it out then. I did forget to mention only R1 zones, so not churches and, so yeah, you guys already understand that.
Churches are urban zone, right?
Churches are mostly R1.
So how do we,
But I think that's
We're
the
saying
dwelling.
this would only be allowed on properties where the principal use is a single family.
okay.
Yeah.
All right. No R2?
No, we were not proposing to.
That was it?
I mean, I think we discussed that at the first meeting,
Oh, yeah.
of whether to allow them on duplexes. I think you
Right.
guys said just single family was for now, but.
Single family homes only.
We don't have a lot of duplexes, right?
We don't have a lot, and most of them, they're small, they don't conform to our minimum lot size as it is. Excellent.
Very good.
No other concerns?
I think
At least
we
for the
got
people in this
through it.
room.
Right around.
So what are next steps in terms of, taking it to city council and all that?
So I think we would kind of get a polished draft, kind of vet it again internally with all the departments, city attorney, and then schedule it for a public hearing for planning commission.
Yeah, get it posted on the website, start taking feedback again.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Now, the chair, we sent out an email, he just had some comments. I haven't really had time to look at them. I don't know
Yeah, did you guys all see that? It was sent out like a couple hours ago, from Chair Bennett. He had some comments.
Yeah, I had a lot of comments.
I don't think I have my phone. Yeah, if you don't mind. Pull it up. Good.
I mean, he had some thoughts about aesthetic standards.
So he copied, the Minneapolis ADU ordinance and pasted it in here and then added some comments, and I think he was saying that what he's highlighted here in yellow is consistent with our ordinance, and then things highlighted in red are maybe things for us to consider. So we just kind of talked about, you know, having them only allowed on single-family properties and not two-family properties. We do have this in our ordinance that the ADU cannot be its own tax parcel. It can't be subdivided and sold separately, so that is in there. We don't have anything specifically about saying decks shall not face an interior yard, but we do have it in there that rooftop decks are not allowed. And then, so this is regarding the owner occupancy requirement, which, so Minneapolis did take this out. But then with the litigation, they were forced to go back to all of their rules that were on the books prior to adopting the Minneapolis, the 2040 comp plan. So this language is from before they revised their ADU ordinance. They ended up taking out the owner occupancy requirement. But before they did, they had a requirement that if you wanted to build an ADU, you had to record a deed restriction against the property and file it with the county. And so I think for, when we kind of looked at this, how to address kind of the owner occupancy, because I think there was a concern about, you know, corporations buying them too. Bloomington just simply says that, you know, to rent any dwelling unit, you need to have a rental license, and for a single family property with an ADU, only one of the units is eligible to be rented. So that was what we wrote in the draft, to just say that you can only get a rental license for one unit. So that would, that should deter corporations from wanting to buy them, or, you know, companies out in, you know, the East Coast from buying homes and trying to rent out both.
Yeah.
Now with a rental license, you can have a qualifying relative live there. So it wouldn't necessarily be the owner, but I believe that's true with a homestead. You can have a relative homestead as well. So it gets tricky when you try to say that the owner of the property has to live there.
Yeah.
There were kind of a number of different logistical issues that we think could come up with that. And so the easiest way to do it just seemed to be just restrict the rental license to one unit. And then any violation is treated just like if someone's renting out a house without a rental license. It's just, we follow the same approach for enforcement that we would there.
I think the lesser concern was just upkeep as well, having the owner occupancy, and I guess we treat it, if you don't take care of your yard, we treat it as another violation if someone complains.
Right.
Yeah, so that's how we catch that. That's a good call. Configuration.
Entire internal, located on one level.
Yeah, we don't have anything saying it has to be on one level.
I don't know, I just feel like practically, who's gonna do that? Got two-level internal
It
ADU.
feels weird to, if someone decides to put a two-story attachment on their home, and I mean, I think that's allowed.
Or even
Well,
your,
and we also talked about like a two-story ADU
Yeah.
that's not part of a detached garage.
Yeah.
Like, do you want to allow this? I think it sounded like
I'm
yes.
fine with it. And that's where we, you know, you got the 12 foot and you can do that as long as it's within the 25 feet.
So would all that patio, that wooden patio, would that all be considered impervious?
Impervious, yeah.
Even though it's open, I mean,
And so the principal structure would have to have the same materials as that, right?
You know what?
No.
I,
He's suggesting that here.
and
Oh, yeah,
I
Jimmy is.
don't think we can legislate taste.
Cause do we do anything with that now, where we say, yeah, I mean,
That's always a tough
we
one
saw
for
that in a
staff.
number of other city ordinances where they'll say, yeah, it has to match. Well, what does match mean? Now, we're in a position of having to
Yeah.
determine whether it matches, and then what if the neighbor says that doesn't match? Well, what?
Yeah.
We don't wanna be getting into arguments over that.
in country club, can they determine it has to be
Well, that-
matching colors?
that
Or
They
is
have to
that-
go through the,
Historic.
they have to go through the
So they have a
Heritage
separate,
Preservation Board.
a separate step.
He did have something about, yeah, so stairs leading to an attached accessory dwelling unit located above the ground floor of a principal residential structure shall be enclosed or located entirely to the rear of the principal structure. Ours currently would say they can be on the side. So he's suggesting we only allow exterior stairs along the back. If you want stairs on the side, it would have to be enclosed.
I don't know.
Yeah.
What if it's what if it's a 20,000 acre property and they're like 100 feet back from,
Or like, someone could have a deck on the side of their house now
Yeah,
and
I
have
know.
stairs, so. I think when we drafted this, we just tried to kind of be consistent with like, what can someone already do at their house? And
Yeah.
let's try to not like add a bunch of requirements that
Yeah.
don't apply to
Yeah.
existing properties.
yeah, they meet the setback and.
On that accessory dwelling units, can't face the primary street. We have a lot of those ramblers where there's an entrance to the lower level that faces the street, and then the main entrance to the house is up. Some people might wanna, have that lower level as an ADU.
Right, so, and again, so this is, like, what he's highlighted is Minneapolis's code language. So he was saying, let's see, where is that? Yeah, we need to clean this up, our wording, this is more clear and protective. A home could have started with multiple entrances facing the street. So, the way our draft reads, I guess I interpret it as being more restrictive than that, because we're saying only one exterior entrance to the principal structure, including for an accessory dwelling unit, shall be allowed on any side facing a public street. Whereas Minneapolis just says no additional entrances. So this would be limiting it to one.
Okay.
So in that
my scenario, they
situation,
need a variance.
Yeah.
to create that into an ADU, yeah, they would. So I guess,
That's okay, I mean,
Yeah.
they should be able to get it if that's the only thing that they don't comply with, and their plan otherwise makes sense.
Yeah,
You've got a
okay.
Rambler, the Rambler was built with two doors on it.
yeah. So I guess the question is, if it's already there, do you wanna make them go through the variance to do that? Cause like the way Minneapolis words it, you just can't create additional entrances.
Well, by saying,
You know what I mean? So that would then
So
allow
that would
someone to
allow it.
convert what you're saying, like that example, would be allowed without
People
those.
with the tuck under garage and they have a doorway
Yeah.
down here, and then to get to the main level, you go upstairs, but if the lower level is gonna be a separate dwelling unit, you can't use that as an
Right.
entrance?
So we could take the Minneapolis language and,
If we're trying to be more flexible and permissive, then maybe that's a good idea, but.
yeah, I think this is actually a little bit more flexible.
It is.
So I
well,
think,
but you're still, even in a remodel, you're creating an accessory dwelling unit. So that language, I think they would need a variance still.
Well, it could be a door into the building, you got your stair upstairs and then an additional door, right? There's ways to configure that so it can work for that it can work.
If the door's already there
Mhm.
Yeah.
and they're remodeling it to create an ADU, you would say that requires
There's,
a variance?
they're creating.
already there?
We're creating an accessory dwelling unit, and it's resulting in the fact that they're using that existing entrance from the public street, facing the public street.
Yeah,
So they wouldn't need a variance.
they would,
for that. Yeah,
even though it's already there?
Yep.
Okay.
I would say, yeah,
So then it sounds like
from
it,
that language.
The creation of accessory dwelling does not result in additional entrances, but if there is an existing entrance, it's not an additional entrance. That's how I read it.
Existing entrance, not an additional entrance. Why would an existing
If there's, if you have a house that's a split level,
Yeah,
and there is a
interpret it
garage
that way
door,
too. Yeah,
and a door next to it, and there's a front entry, there are two doors, and if you turn the lower door as the door into the accessory dwelling, to me, that's not the creation of a new door. It's just reusing an existing door.
I'm guessing that's why they use the word additional entrances.
yep,
Yeah.
yep, I'm in.
On the Minneapolis version? I'm in on the Minneapolis
Yeah.
version.
Yep.
So it was helpful to read Jimmy's email.
Do you want to qualify that to make it clear, to say, rather than just say additional entrances that didn't already exist or something? Because additional, we already were arguing about.
Or they
right?
could just
Right.
add a door and then apply for.
Yeah, I mean,
I suppose, I
But
suppose.
that's an additional entrance.
well, if you have a house and you add a door.
Before
then
you
later
apply
on-
for the ADU
yeah,
permit?
then later on, you decide, that's, yeah, that's what it is.
You can just add a door wherever you want, anywhere?
Sure.
Yeah,
Nothing that says you can't have two front doors, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, is there a reason why we wouldn't want an additional entrance facing the street? I guess,
It's-
we're getting, you're driving into like all this design stuff that gets to be really
Right.
complicated.
Well, we try to keep it simple with only a few
We could
of
just
those
keep,
requirements, but
just
yeah, it's
put it in.
intending to.
oh, we have it in, that's
Do I
right.
have it in here? I don't have it in here. It's just trying to maintain the appearance of a single family
Right,
yeah.
neighborhood, so
That's
it doesn't
key.
look like a duplex or something. But, yeah, anything about like materials and consistency with the primary dwelling.
And that's gonna look less like a
Took
separate
all of
dwelling
that.
unit than a single structure out there with a separate door and everything else.
That's why it's gotta be in the, what you're talking about, like a detached?
Correct.
That's why it's
Even though
gotta
it's
be in to the rear of the
Rear.
principal structure.
So he's also suggesting 21-foot height.
Well, we solved that.
Yeah, I think we did that.
Sticking with 25?
Yeah.
We had a good discussion on that. Came to a good conclusion.
Oh, yeah. Sounds like you guys are kind of.
Yeah, I'm not gonna legislate.
I looked at that.
He was saying.
I think we want to keep 25.
We solved that.
Yeah, okay.
He was attempting to, we did it. And he's just highlighting what theirs is?
He's just highlighting things for us to discuss.
Okay.
So an interior side yard, meaning you're not on a corner?
Correct. Ours would be 5.
And we're using our existing zoning.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything less than 5 is not conforming, so.
Yeah, so, okay, this is one thing I've heard about Minneapolis's ordinances, yeah, they had this 20-foot setback requirement, 20 feet between a detached ADU and the house. And I've heard that that was a big barrier, that like there was a lot of properties where they can't meet that, and so that was one reason why not a lot were getting built. I actually don't see a, setback like this in most of the other cities' AD ordinances. There are some that do.
What's the rationale for that? Why do we even care?
I don't know. There are some building code implications where it will come into play, where there'll be some minimum separation due to like fire rating, things like that. But I don't think we need to impose an additional, we don't have that for existing accessory structures now, so I don't know.
I mean, we have single-family homes that are 10 feet apart.
Right. And then, yeah, here too, building code kind of already regulates the durability of exterior materials, unless you want to do it for aesthetic purposes, but it sounds like we don't.
Code, yeah.
5% of the total area of the facade for windows.
Nice stuff.
Well, the building department, once again, has ventilation requirements and egress requirements. Okay. You did good. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think, you know, again, guys, really good conversation. I'm looking forward to what the residents have to say now on their feedback. I'm expecting a lot of feedback because a lot of passionate people about wanting to build ADUs and they want things to be as flexible as possible. Some residents want things to be a little bit constrained, but I think you have more folks wanting it, so we'll see what comes back. But yeah, just thanks for all the really good conversation and feedback, and Addison and planning team for just working through it and bouncing it around and getting it to a good discussion and a good place right now. So appreciate you guys working through that.
Thank you.
And thank you, and thank you guys for, yeah.
One quick thing, when we're ready to present this to council, assuming it gets through planning commission, I think it's helpful if 1, 2, or 3 or members of the commission are there, because they'll want to know more how you all thought about this, as opposed to staff interpreting the way you've thought about it. And I think it was beneficial for the parking ordinance. I know it didn't go exactly how you were wanting it, but it was helpful that you were there.
Would we do this as a work session for the city council?
Well, we thought about that, but we're thinking
We're just gonna present it.
we're gonna just,
Got too much into it to let them keep playing around with it.
I'm happy to show up.
And when that